So I'm hearing about this police officer, David Carrick, who admits to being a serial rapist. We'll get on to that. Now, I was talking to somebody else. Is this something new, or is it that we have the ability, because of the internet, to find out more about these people? Has this always been going on? And I would say I think it has. I think stuff like this has been going on ever since. I'll give you a few examples. I actually know of people, they're not friends, but I do know of them, that have been kicked out of the police force for all sorts of stuff, right? I got to hear about them, when you're in the pub and somebody points over and that's an ex-copper, and he was thrown out for interfering with a witness. More than interfering, he actually had an affair with it, but that's another thing. Now, I do believe that when we go back to, say, for instance, 60s London, that the police force, many of them, not all, many, had been bribed. It was hard to go after the Richardsons because the Richardsons literally had so many police in their pocket. I believe the Krays did as well. And I was watching a documentary about it, and this one guy who got tortured by the Richardsons went to a policeman from a group outside of London because he just didn't trust the Met. And it turns out that the flying squad, or whatever it was back then, were, is it Scotland Yard? Scotland Yard was so full of it that so many people were on the payroll that you couldn't get anything done. So they had to go, as I say, to an external police force, and they had to find men that they could trust, and they had to tiptoe around so the Met didn't get to hear about it. That was in the 60s. In the 70s, we had police officers that fitted up people on a regular. There was a thing called verbaling. And if they could get you to talk, they could talk you into a crime by verbaling you. So a lot of coppers worked out, not coppers, criminals learned not to say anything. But that didn't really help with things like the Guildford 4, the Birmingham 6 and stuff like that. These people, they knew they were innocent, and yet they fitted them up just because it got the problem out of the way and calmed down the general population. So we knew about things like that. But there's going to be a lot more of this come out at the moment. At the moment, there's 400 and some odd cases at the moment being investigated of allegations of sexual misconduct. Half of them are within the police force to other coppers. So, it's not exclusive to the public. They do it to each other. Now, something I did know about police, because I had friends back in the day who were in the police force. We're not in contact anymore, strangely enough. I don't think they could be in contact with me because of what I do. Know what I mean? Anyway, and they were saying these people were always running off with each other and having affairs. Yeah, it wasn't the norm, but it was well known that many male and female coppers that worked together were having it off, as they say. So let's go back to this sack, because it turns out, right, before I read this, and I'm going to read this fresh with you, so here we go. But it turns out that I believe that people knew about him, and there were 9 different occasions that his name cropped up, but yet nothing was done. But yet they'll go after people like James Goddard for hurty words, and they'll try and do it for, what do they call it? Something, malicious communications. Although, if you see the bit that Lawrence Fox did about it on GB News, there is some grey area about what actually they're trying to charge him with, because they're trying to charge him over something that actually, is it this particular crime, which was set out in the 80s, or is it this particular crime which was then set out in the 90s? Because you're saying it's both, so which one is it, one or the other? But anyway, let's get on to this. A Metropolitan Police armed officer who used his role to put fear into his victims. Standard. Have you met some of these armed officers? Some of them are all right, but the rest of them all want to be SAS heroes. I've met them. The arrogance with them is quite breathtaking, and it's one of those things that when they've got a gun attached to them, they're hard as nails. Get them on their own down an alley. Not that I would condone anything, but they might be a very different person. They might be a bit more submissive. That's what I mean. In a conversation. So, victims has admitted dozens of rape and sexual offences against 12 women. Brilliant. Lovely guy. And when I have a look at the picture of him, he doesn't look like what you would imagine, whatever that is. Anyway, David Carrick, 48, who met some victims through dating websites, pleaded guilty to 49 offences across 2 decades. The Met has apologised after it emerged he had come to their attention of police over 9 incidents, including rape allegations between 2000 and 2021. I'm sorry, when somebody pops up about rape allegations and they're in a position of that power, you need to go through everything they're doing with a fine-tooth comb, because it's obvious. I don't have to explain it, but this man is a force, is a position of force. He has ultimate power there. Now, you have to ask questions. If he's capable of breaking the law and committing rape, is he capable of popping around into somebody that he doesn't particularly like if he's out on the job? And then, will they cover that up? Do you know what I mean? A senior officer said his offending was unprecedented in policing. Assistant Commissioner Barbara Gray, the Met's lead for professionalism, said, "We should have spotted his pattern of abusive behaviour, and because we didn't, we missed opportunities to remove him from the organisation. We are truly sorry that being able to continue to use his role as a police officer may have prolonged the suffering of his victims." I would imagine it did. "We know they felt unable to come forward sooner because he told them they would not be believed." Yeah, the arrogance. Cool, she's a thing of beauty, isn't she? I could go into more, but our police now, to me, in many ways seem much like the mafia. They commit crime whilst policing the area. You have to do as they say, yet they can do what they like. When they're trying to throw, I don't know, say for instance, take Base Welshman the other day. He was in a place where he'd been ruffled up. He committed no crime at all. Yet they tried to give him this section, I think it's 43 or 48, I'm not sure which one it is, dispersal order. But if Base didn't know the law, he'd have been gotten rid of by this person, and it was illegal. It wasn't a legitimate move. He had no way of doing that correctly. And it seems that either a lot of these police officers don't actually understand the law as well as they should do, or understand it and break it to suit their own ends. I'm going with the second one more than the first, although there are some really thick idiots in there. But I've done videos before about this, and there's many police that wouldn't have got into the police force back in the old days, but they've had to lower the bar because, well, nobody's interested in the job, it doesn't seem. And they've got people with quite interesting criminal backgrounds, and they have people in there at the moment that they know have connections to organised crime. You're meant to be a policeman. You're meant to protect the innocent, protect the community, enforce the law, uphold the law, and make sure that everything goes about tickety-boo. That, you know, there's no domestic violence, there's no burglary. There's an interesting one. I never gets done anything about these days. Robbing of cars, that kind of thing. But it does seem that there's far too many of them out there at the moment going after people who say the wrong thing. They're policing thoughts and policing words. And it seems to me that they're getting themselves ready and put into a position where they'll be much like some sort of police in a country that has communism. That's how it feels. Now, you might think I'm talking out my head. That's up to you. Put it in the comments. Let me know. But it is one of those where I've warned people in the past not to trust the police, have no engagement with the police, and unless you really have to use the police force, right, avoid it. Because half the time they'll show up and try and nick you for it. Now, as a lorry driver, I know that the tacho and the camera system in my truck, they'll use that first. Before they even look at, I don't know, say, for instance, the other motorist, even if it was clearly his fault, what they want to do is use the camera evidence and say, oh, he was picking his nose 5 yards back, let's nick him. Undue care. Or whatever. So I know that, and some of you may say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. Yeah? Tell that to the Guildford 4 or the Birmingham 6 or whatever you want. Tell that to all the other people that they fitted up that are in prison right now that actually shouldn't be in prison. There's another thing at the moment. There's a case which I've got to look into. One of the longest serving innocent prisoners in the UK at the moment who's in prison. I don't have his name to mind because I didn't think about this before I started this video. However, he was accused of murder. And the thing is, if he'd have gone guilty, he'd have been out years and years ago. And even though he served his time, he has to admit he's guilty because he was found guilty on, so let's say, less than, well, dubious evidence, put it that way. But because he won't admit his guilt, they won't let him out because they can't rehabilitate him. Him admitting his guilt is all part of it. So it looks like because he's now very ill, he'll probably die in prison, an innocent man. So there's a lot of that goes on. They keep people in prison longer than they should because of reasons, and yet they let people who have been involved in sex with minors, people who are violent criminals, people that are gang members, they let all sorts of people out who are totally degenerate. But it seems that some of the people who they could have been in prison for a very, very long time and not actually committed any crime while they were in there, and a lot of them bettered themselves, they won't let them out. I mean, give you a good example of insanity. Under the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement, they let out all the criminals from both sides who had wantonly gone around and murdered people at will. But they called it a war. Fine, that's your description. And I wasn't over there, so I can't argue with that. I mean, I have to say, if I had have grown up in those times, there's every chance that I could have ended up going to an organisation, because I'm one of those kind of guys that feel kind of strongly about things, and you would have probably been recruited back then. So I can't say about that. But what I will say is that when you've gone out and you've actively, knowingly shot somebody on their doorstep, or you've gone into a pub and shot a pub up, all right, and that doesn't matter which side you're on, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, you were a murderer. That's the way it is. It's the facts. And they let them all out early because of the peace agreement, which I find amazing. And yet there's people in there who are innocent that probably won't ever get out. And there's people out there, or in there, that get out early that commit a crime again because, well, you know, in some cases, say, take, for instance, a paedophile, you haven't addressed the problem. You've just punished him for acting out his desires. How do you treat the problem? That I don't know. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, you could castrate them, but that apparently has no difference because it's up there, not down there. I don't know. Unless you are one, you'll never know, will you? But it's a mad thing, and anything to do with the law and the judicial system and the process of it is amazing. And yeah, I have no trust of police, no trust of the system, and I'm pretty sure that at some point in my life going forward, though I'll commit no crime, if I carried on doing this and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, sooner or later I would be fitted up and I'd be put in prison. Especially with the direction that the system itself is going in at the moment, becoming more like North Korea. You know, it's not going there as fast as, say, for instance, Canada, but it's still headed in that direction. And as I have no intention of ever giving up what I'm doing, sooner or later I will end up in one of those super prisons. Yeah. And can you imagine when you get in there, all of a sudden you'll get liquid cosh like they did to Melanie Shaw or others. And that'll be the last. So that's optimism for you, isn't it? Happy Tuesday. But it is what it is. Just because the threats of that are there doesn't mean that you should stop. It just means that you need to be aware of it, I suppose. Anyway, on to the next video. The channel at the moment is being completely ghosted by YouTube. It does this. It's weird. It follows its patterns. You do really well, and then all of a sudden it peaks, and then it comes down, and then you slowly stop gaining subs. Then you go along for a while, then you start losing subs. Then all of a sudden you shoot back up, and you do it all again. Weird. Why can't they just let you grow steadily? Yeah, that would be nice. But anyway, not my platform, so I can't make the rules. Anyway, I'll see you all in a bit.